Hello out there to all you TLBTV viewers. You've joined us another week for Right the World with your host, Lorana Hoops. This show is brought to you by TLBTV and the Liberty Beacon Project. And this is the show where we talk to all sorts of different authors and writers from different genres. We give you maybe some tips that you haven't heard before. And of course, we introduce you to some great new books that you need to check out. And my guest today, I'm so excited to introduce you guys to, is Brode Jr. How are you doing today, Gene?
I'm doing great.
Yes.
How are you?
I am doing very well, except for the fact that sickness has hit our house. Being a teacher, my husband drives buses, and then we have 3 kids in the school district. We do not get to escape it when school starts.
Oh, yeah.
So we've been sucking vitamin C and trying to get as much sleep as possible.
Oops, sorry about that.
That's all right. Okay, so let's talk about this book that you have. So you called this Essential Meditations for Backsliders. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm assuming that this book is about meditations. It's got meditations in it, right?
Yeah, it's a 40-day devotional book with a bunch of different Bible devotionals in it.
Awesome. And what made you come up with the idea for this book?
Well, as a Christian, I've been a Christian probably for 25 years or a little more. And I just went through this valley a few years back and had a real struggle with just trying to get myself to read the Bible and pray, and went through just a really hard time. And so it really affected my family, and because I was just kind of a miserable person. And so I know of a lot of different tricks and things that you can do to I guess grow spiritually, and just kind of out of sheer desperation, I just started preaching to myself with pen and paper, and to try to get myself back in gear. And that's sort of how it all started.
That's a pretty amazing story. So what were some of the things that you came across? Like, what were some big pieces that were just kind of like, oh yeah, this definitely has to go in the book?
I mean, the first one, the whole book, the title of the book, Essential Meditations for Backsliders, was based off of a verse in Proverbs: "The backslider in heart will be filled with the fruit of his ways." And I think that I've been in evangelistic ministries where we would talk to people and try to help them decide whether they were Christians or whether they were not yet Christians or whether they were fake Christians.
Right.
So I kind of applied that verse to myself, and I was like, man, Gene, you don't look like a real Christian now. You're not walking the walk. And so I had to really examine myself, and that was the main verse. There's a lot of other warning passages in the Bible that talk about, especially in Hebrews, talking about what fate people will have to face if they turn away from the Lord. And it's like, geez, what do you do with that? So I kind of used those verses, those passages to get myself into a more serious mindset. And along the way, I realized, this would help others. It could help others. So instead of just setting out to write a book and get it published, which is what I really wanted to do, I decided I'm going to put this in pencil or in pen, and I'm going to write it to myself. And I'm going to first focus it on me, because it's really no good to anybody if I'm going to live as a hypocrite, but I'm going to say some neat things and somebody gets something out of it, but I'm, not practicing what I preach.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that must have been sort of a challenging journey to go through. How long did it take you to finish?
Well, I think it was, I think in the fall of 2 years ago, 2015, I started handwriting it. And it took me, with all the interruptions and distractions in life, it probably took me a good 6 months to just get all the meditations down. And then maybe not that long, but after that, I did some other chapters on things that I had written in the devotionals that I thought, somebody's going to have a problem with this. So I did sort of like an explanatory chapter on concepts like, can we lose our salvation? That's kind of a controversial one. And so things like that. So I think all in all, by the time it just went live on Amazon September, the beginning of this month. So it took about 2 years from start to finish.
Wow. A labor of love, though, right?
It is, yeah.
Absolutely. Now, I know that you, we talked before we actually started the show, and you have been writing for quite a long time. Just, fictional things and stuff you started in college. So had you started a book and then all of a sudden the need for this devotional arose?
No, I mean, I've had ideas for novels over the last 5 years or so. And actually one of them, I think I've written the first 2 or 3 chapters over several times and said, I don't like this. So that one just kind of lived. There's 2 or 3 of them. There's a third one, which is only in my mind,
Right.
but I want to treat it like a baby. And so I haven't even started to really do that yet. But in college, I took classes on short fiction, and that's really what I love instead of novels. I have a short attention span, so I can last throughout one story. I can complete stories, but the longer ones are a little bit challenging.
Yeah, they're daunting to sit down and write too. When you like 50,000 words, oh, that's not too bad. And then you start writing and you're like, I'm only at like 1,600. What? Yeah, it's a long step to get up there. But okay, so let's talk about the writing process for you. Like what was the easiest part for you?
The easiest part of this book was once I found some verses that I wanted to think about. It was kind of like sort of more or less like writing commentary. So that was kind of easy for me because I've been a long time studier of the Bible. I like to write notes. I used to blog about different Bible passages and theological concepts, and like I said, with in college, you had to do all these research papers. So that kind of stuff, the nonfiction, it kind of comes pretty easy to me.
Right. What about the hardest part? What was the hardest part of the journey?
There were several. Part of the publishing process, I mean, I thought you get a good app, you can export it to Amazon and click a button and you're done. And that was the last part, and it took months to get all that together, and then the formatting and all that stuff. So that was pretty challenging. There was also like the self-doubt, where I'm writing this stuff and I had moments where I thought you sound like you're a big somebody, but you're really nothing. And so just getting through that and trying not to sound like the authority on the topic, that was a little challenging.
Did you play that Matthew West song in the background while you were working Broken Pieces?
No, I didn't.
Have you heard it?
I don't think so.
So it's all a line about how God uses broken people, and there's a part in there where he talks about like all of the misfits and the rebels that God used in the Bible made it to where he could finally accept that God could use a sinner like him, and he talks about how God doesn't use the perfect people. God uses the broken people so that the glory goes to God. So it sounds like it would be a perfect like soundtrack for the back of your book as you're writing.
Yeah, I'll have to play that next time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good one. I like it. So I always find it interesting when people, when we talk about, oh, hey, I'm an author, and people are like, oh, great, you get to write books. And I'm like, yeah, that's the easy part. That's, nobody really thinks about how much goes into the formatting and then making it get up on, Amazon correctly, and the channels to even get people to be able to find your book. So what have you found about like the promotional aspect of it? Because I think that once you finally get the book up, the promotional side is probably just as challenging.
Yeah, I am still trying to figure that out. Like I said before, I'm a blogger, and I've had a couple of different blogs over the years, and building a following, it seems like it takes forever. And
Right.
then even when you've got like a couple hundred followers, you write something and you look at your stats and you have, oh, 2 people saw it. And I'm like, all right, I got 200 followers, but nobody's reading anything. So now I'm at the stage of doing that with a book, and it's I've had some good sales for the first week, but it's slow going. So
Yeah, it's a really slow uphill climb, and I'm in one of the Facebook groups that's called 20 books to 50K, and I never really thought about the title until somebody talked about it on there, and they said you pretty much have to have 20 books out before you really start seeing anything come back from your sales, because that's how many books you would need for someone to like you and then start reading all the rest of your stuff, and for there to be enough of a trickle down that it really, pays for what you've put in for the cover and everything else, the formatting and all of that you do, which I found kind of daunting, because I was like, wow, I think I just hit 7 and I have 13 to go.
Man, I got a lot more books than to catch up on.
Yeah, but it sounds like you have some books in your head. So let's talk about some of these fictional short stories that you're looking at. Like, what genre do you see them in?
Well, in college, the only thing I was really exposed to, the first thing I was exposed to was, I guess, what some people call literary fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Not to sound snobby over, anything else as if it's not literary, but I think it's some of my favorite authors. There's very few Christian authors that kind of fall into that category. So I tend to lean towards, I have a lot of favorite non-Christian authors.
Right.
Robert Olen Butler is perhaps one of my favorites. And he's got a bunch of novels. He won the Pulitzer some time back. But he's got a couple collections of short stories, and each short story is there's such gems. You get into the character of what's going on in their heart, and how they respond to their desires and things like that. So it really is, you get into it and you feel like you're really into a real person's life with something interesting that's going on. So Raymond Carver's another one. I think he died about 20 years ago or 30 years ago. And I'm drawing a blank here. Look at my bookshelf, but like Flannery O'Connor, I like her. So I try to write in that style. I try to figure out what they're doing that's intriguing to me, and then put that into my fiction. But I'm also trying to I try to write about spiritual themes in a way that isn't sappy, I guess.
Yeah, I've had this discussion with several other Christian authors too, and we've all kind of come to this conclusion that, there's a few really good Christian books out there, but a lot of them either fall into this like super preachy category that nobody but Christians would ever want to read, or they fall into this more like sappy, category. And it's just really hard because, yeah, you want to write it for Christians, but we also want to be reaching non-believers out there. And so there's sort of this fine line that you have to walk between making it interesting for non-believers and still putting in, the spiritual elements behind it that are really important for believers.
Yeah. And, real life isn't about everybody gets saved in the end.
That's true too.
And, there are people even that, did you ever see the movie, I think it was God's Not Dead?
I saw the first one. I haven't seen the second one yet.
Was the first one where the guy actually gets hit by a car in the end? And
yes, I believe
spoiler
so.
alert.
In a while.
But I mean, the atheist, I can't remember if, I think he still rejected God. I can't remember now. But, that's sad. You want the bad guys to get saved in real life, but literature isn't about, I guess it doesn't have to be all happy endings. And sometimes when you see something that doesn't end happily, it makes you, it has the potential, I think, to change you and make you think, you know what, I got to take this stuff more seriously in my real life, because this is what's happening in, I don't know, somebody's life who's really suffering and might be struggling with faith.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of those different struggles. Something I always try to put in my characters is make them more realistic. Like, just because they're Christian characters doesn't mean that their whole life is perfect. It's not all roses all the time. And, they go through those faith things like you were walking through, and I've been through those where, you kind of sit back and you're like, am I even doing it right? Like, I don't know. I'm not feeling connected. I'm not feeling like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And, we all struggle with those questions, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm actually working on another book, another essential meditations book, which kind of along the same lines with struggling, the working title is Essential Meditations for Authentic Christianity.
Awesome.
So, am I really living an authentic life? In my struggles at work and at home, how am I treating my family and my coworkers and customers, and what would a real Christian do? What does the Bible say I should do when people irritate me? So these are things that, and when I wrote this, the first book, the reason I wrote it was because I wanted to have something to refer back to, because I can tell you 1,000 things of what you should do, but I'll forget them all.
Right.
So, if I write them down, I write everything down, but if I write them down and I have something to refer back to, then maybe it will click and I'll start growing more. So.
Absolutely. I think that's really helpful. And I know there are, a lot of devotionals out there, but I really find that I don't think you can have too many, because there's really good things in one that aren't in another, and vice versa, and so I think that you can still, even if you have a devotional, like, you can still find these nuggets of wisdom from the different people and the different ways that they present it, which is really important.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a couple of favorites, and even like I've got an old, probably everybody has Oswald Chambers' devotional. What is that? My utmost for his highest.
Oh, right. Yep. I'm pretty sure we have that on our shelf too.
Yeah, I don't think I've read the whole thing, but there are some, it's something to go back to and get something out of.
Absolutely. So I am really curious, and you don't have to answer it if you don't want to, but you mentioned losing your salvation. And so I'm really curious in your research where you came down on this line, because my parents feel one way, and I'm not exactly sure how I feel about it, because I've met some people who, were Christians when they were younger, and then they've fallen away, and they're leading very different lives. And I've always kind of wondered, and I know no one has a definitive answer because we're not God, but I'm curious in your research where you fall on this line.
Well, it's been a journey for me, because when I was in college, I was in a campus ministry, and it was, once saved, always saved.
Right.
And there were a lot of people who didn't, would come kind of on the fringes of the ministry, get involved a little bit, and then go back to whatever they were doing beforehand that didn't involve God. And I used to always wonder, how can they be a Christian and live like that? But if you're really saved, then you're not gonna, if you do live like that, then you'll be okay. And then about 10 years ago, I kind of flip-flopped, and I went to the other side, and I said, well, you can't lose your salvation, but you'll bear the right fruit. So if you're not bearing the right fruit, then maybe you're not saved. So I kind of teetered in that. Now where I'm at, after, about 3 years ago, when I went into my spiritual valley, actually was it 2013, 4 years ago. I had a major change of my theology, and part of that, this came up out of that. So where I stand now is, I don't think you can look at any one person and say they lost their salvation or they were never saved. I think, as you said, only God is going to really know
Right.
what's really going on. But the way I look at it now is that we can't slip out of God's hand. He's not going to let us go in that sense. But I look at our relationship with God, our salvation, as a covenant. It's the new covenant. And just like the old covenant, there were Jews who would stay faithful to it and Jews who wouldn't. So I kind of look at the new covenant as one that's, it's a two-sided covenant. Jesus is always going to stay faithful, but if we're warned not to harden our hearts, not to give in to sin, and so we do have a responsibility. We're not going to keep ourselves saved, but if we harden our hearts and we let sin take over and we aren't careful like the scriptures tell us to be careful, then we're going to essentially start pushing God away. And I don't think God, either in our salvation or in our sanctification, is ever going to force us to obey him. I think he wants us to we have a part to play, and that's obedience, faithfulness, to love him in return to him, in response to his love for us. So I don't like the term losing your salvation, but I think you can forfeit it. I think people can walk away. You see them walk away.
Right.
And so I guess that's kind of where I stand on that.
Yeah, that's a hard topic. But, and it's, again, like I said, one of those that I don't think anybody has a definitive answer on. I don't think the Bible is very explicit in that one way or the other. Because, there are some verses that say you can't lose your salvation, but then you're right, there are some verses that say, like, there are things that will keep you from God. And so it's sort of meshing the two together.
Yeah, and I think that keeps you, for me, we should fear God, but we don't fear him in the way that that the world might fear him. We don't fear his wrath per se if we're saved, if we're forgiven. But there is, still a reason to kind of keep you on your toes, and we don't want to displease him. And gosh, if we harden our hearts, I don't want to face him like that, in my sin. I want to hear one of my favorite verses over the last few years is I want to hear those words where he says, "Well done, good and faithful servant."
Yeah.
I don't want, I don't know that he'll be saying, "Well, you did okay. Come on in," or depart from me, but I want to hear "well done" and a hearty "well done." And I'm still trying to, I don't think I deserve that yet, but maybe I'll never deserve it. But I
think that's
faithful.
The whole point, is that none of us deserve it. That's what grace is for.
Yeah.
That's a hard lesson to get, that, you're not going to be perfect and you're going to make mistakes, but, God's grace is there for when that happens. But you have to, as you were saying, you have to still seek it. You can't just assume that you can, accept and then lead the life the way you want to, because I don't think that works either.
Yeah. I think I'm in a Bible study right now. We were just talking about in Romans, the obedience of faith. And I think part of that is when we hear the gospel and we believe it, it leads to obedience in our lives. It should, Jesus said, "You know them by their fruits," regarding false teachers and false prophets. And I think it's the same for everybody. We're going to bear fruit, and what you're living like is kind of shows what's going on inside your heart.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So is your next devotional going to be very similar to your first one? About 40 days, you said is what the first one is?
Yeah, that's my goal, is 40 devotions. And that's kind of tricky, because now I'm like, all right, what are these going to be about, and how am I going to divide up the book? Because I don't want to, I don't believe that there's no works salvation. So I don't want it to be a how to be an authentic Christian type of book. I want it to be like, here's what goes on in real Christians' hearts. Here's what goes on in real Christians' lives, or should be going on in your life. So I'm probably at this point, I'm splitting it half and half, about 20 devotions for what's true of us on the inside, and then maybe 20 or so of how we act outwardly when different things happen or in certain situations.
Well, it sounds like it will be just as good as your first one, and definite sort of a mirror reflection for us to look back on our lives and just do that little self-check of, okay, where am I? Am I doing things right? Am I not doing things that I didn't even know I wasn't doing right? Things like that I think people need as they're going along in their journey.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's not always a willful, I know this is wrong, but I'm going to do it. But sometimes it's I'm not aware that I'm even doing this, or I'm not aware that I should be doing this, kind of thing, that I think is just as helpful for people.
Yeah, and I'm always concerned about, not just what am I doing that's right and wrong, but why.
Yeah.
And why am I keep acting like a jerk sometimes? And I think behind that is our thinking pattern. There's a couple things. I mean, it's what you're desiring in life, but also maybe there are some wrong things, wrong beliefs, things that we're holding on to that aren't right, and trying to get to the bottom of those and change our thinking, like Scripture says, to be transformed by the renewal of our minds. So, the more we get our thinking in line with what the Bible says about certain things, I think the better off we'll be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, Gene, and I'm super excited to check out your book, and I hope that the viewers will. And just like always, guys, I'll have links above, so you can go and find where Gene's book is and his blog sites. Are your blogs still active, Gene?
On my main website, it is BrodeJr.com.
Okay, so we'll make sure and have that blog for you guys to follow as well.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And it's been such a pleasure to kind of hear, a nonfiction aspect of that. I'm excited to see your fiction stories come to life as well one day. So we'll have to keep in touch so that when that happens, we can put a shout out for you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Yes. And for all of you watching, we'll catch you next time right here on Right the World.